because I've now shown you the famous radar reflector that's supposed to be at the heart of this whole thing. And if I had a real one here to flip around in the air and that you could handle, it would seem all the more absurd. But these pictures we've shown are enough. Okay, Major Marcel had to be a dope. Colonel Blanchard had to be a dope, didn't he? After all, Blanchard was the guy who issued the press release. Now, the Air Force report is very diplomatic about both Marcel and Blanchard. It simply says they can't imagine why the press release was issued. The other Roswell skeptics, however, are very open about this, and we'll get into that a little more, but you need to know right now. To the Roswell skeptics, the first dope was this rancher Mac Brazel. The second dope was Major Marcel. The third dope was Colonel Blanchard. And finally, poor long-suffering General Ramey had to straighten them all out at this embarrassing press conference.
We have another celebrity among us today, the actress Dina Demko. Dina, thanks for being with us here today.
Thanks for having me.
Dina, tell me, Mac Brazel, Major Marcel, and Colonel Blanchard, do you think they're all dopes?
I think that one person can be wrong, but you're talking about two high-ranking military officers. No, I don't think so.
Thank you.
Bob, you said that other people saw this material. Who else witnessed these things?
Okay, a couple of people we're going to talk about. Obviously, because of constraints of time, I can't give you all of the Roswell witness testimony. Remember, Major Marcel went out to the Foster Ranch, came back, shows up in Fort Worth with General Ramey at that famous press conference. Turns out that Major Marcel did not come straight back to the air base from the Foster Ranch. He did a detour. He went to his house, and he woke up his wife, and he woke up his son.
Does his son remember anything about what happened that evening?
He sure does. Unfortunately, Major Marcel died in the mid-'80s. He's no longer around. But his son is alive and well, and a very accomplished man, and he remembers vividly that night when he was awakened. He doesn't know whether it was 10 o'clock at night or 3 o'clock in the morning. It was dark, and there was his father, and there was his mother. And the story that Jesse Marcel Jr. tells is extremely important for us. For one thing, he handled several different types of this debris because his father brought it in. Brought it in and spread it out on the kitchen floor. And what Jesse Jr., excuse me, I'm going to call him Jesse Jr., he's actually Jesse Marcel Jr., MD, an accomplished physician and surgeon, and an Army helicopter pilot and a colonel in the Army Reserves and a flight surgeon and an accident investigator, and it goes on and on. A very accomplished man. What he recalls took place when he was 11 years and 11 months old. And he was not your ordinary almost 12-year-old boy either. He was extremely precocious by all accounts. When he graduated from high school, he was offered a full scholarship to MIT, and he turned it down because he wanted to be a doctor. So he went to LSU for 3 years and then got into medical school. That's who he is. So Dr. Marcel, but we'll call him Jesse Jr. for the rest of this. He goes down. He sees that his father is very excited. And his father's pulling stuff out of a big cardboard box and throwing it on the floor. And his mother and his father, and then he got involved, were trying to put these pieces of stuff together. like you would pieces of a jigsaw puzzle, with no effect, by the way. They could not fit the pieces, but somehow they were inclined to think. At one point, his father said to him, look for resistors and condensers and tubes or electronic parts. They found none, but somehow his father seemed to think there should be some. So they had all this stuff on the floor. Jesse Jr. handled this stuff and played with it. And he says that the biggest piece was about the size of a small dinner plate. And most of the pieces about the size of his hand, or some quite a bit smaller. And they seemed to be shredded along the edges. But he says you couldn't really bend them. They were smooth. They weren't scratched. And they were exceptionally light. And they would fall almost like a feather. There were really three kinds of material that he describes. One is what we call the foil, and that's this metallic stuff. And I've got some right here, which is certainly not what he had, but just to let you know, if you could imagine something like this, only extremely thin, but this is about the color that he describes, kind of a dull metallic aluminum. He's described it as sort of the color of the metal foil that they used to wrap cigarettes with. Now they use plastic that's real shiny and so forth, but if you go back that far. But if you were to drop this, let go of it, and it just sort of floated down almost, and if you tried to bend it, it wouldn't bend, and it was extremely thin. It was just weird stuff. There was also another category of stuff that his father had parceled out, which we call Bakelite, but it wasn't Bakelite. And Jesse Jr. likens that to like a 78 RPM record that's been smashed. But it had no grooves in it, nothing like that. It was just thin and black. And finally, weirdest of all was a rod. And I've got a kind of a replica, a poor replica of the rod. This is about the length. It's about a quarter of an inch by a quarter of an inch. The one that Jesse Jr. describes had an I-beam shape. This is plain square. His had an I-beam shape and a bunch of figures inside the lips of the I-beam. These figures, only a couple of them does Jesse recall exactly. An artist did the others for him, an artist and industrial designer that worked with him. Also, it was not black. It was a very particular purple-pink color. But this will do to illustrate what it looks like. He remembers playing with this rod, which was also extremely light, but not wood. Okay. Finally, after 15 or 20 minutes of fooling with this stuff, they decided that's all we can learn from it. We can't fit pieces together. His father put it back in the box, cardboard box. Jesse Jr. followed his father out the door. He had his car there, a 42 Buick, eggshell blue. And Jesse Jr. recalls that the rear seat, he thought, or the whole rear end of the car, was full of this junk. And with that, his father left someplace. We know it was to the Roswell airfield. Jesse went back to sleep and didn't think about it again for many, many years. Now, what are we going to do with that testimony? First of all, we can compare it with the stuff that was on the floor in General Ramey's office. In fact, here's some good shots of that debris. These are photographs that were taken, remember, at the press conference. If we compare the characteristics that Jesse Jr. describes to us, remember, flat, smooth, no scratches or abrasions. Take a look at this photograph. It's nothing but scratches and abrasions and so forth. There's simply no connection with it. He describes a whole lot of little hand-shaped pieces. This is a couple of giant pieces on the general's floor. So what on earth was it that Major Marcel brought home, put on his kitchen floor, and that Jesse Jr. remembers today?